This is lesson 103 in Algebra 1, more on rational equations. And when the rational equations you've been doing before, rational equations are basically equations that have fractions in them. And you've had things like this with the denominators being all numbers. All right, in order to solve this, we need to first of all get rid of the fractions. We hate doing fractions, so we try to get rid of them. So we put a parenthesis around the whole thing. Look for the common denominator of 2, 4, and 6, the smallest number that both 2, 4, and 6 will go into. 12 is the smallest one because 6 goes into it, 4 doesn't too. Now you could use a number like 24. That is a common denominator, but it's not the smallest one. So if you use 24, that works, but you're just dealing with bigger numbers. So you try to find the smallest one, and you put a parenthesis around the entire equation and multiply by the smallest denominator, or smallest number that both 2, 4, and 6 go into. You distribute it. And you get this. Now this is just review stuff. This is stuff that you've done before. Then you reduce. And you've gotten rid of the fractions and you solve for y. Alright, in this lesson we're going to do something very similar, only we're going to allow you to have letters on the bottom. So, for example, if we did something such as n over n plus 2 equals 3 over 5. Notice we have a variable in the denominator. Now one of the things that you've got to remember is whenever you have a variable and a number put together like that, they are one unit. They cannot be split up. So put parentheses around it to show that that is just one piece there, okay? Because if you don't, you'll end up having some mistakes here when you multiply and add and stuff. So, all right, so now before we can solve this, we want to get rid of the fraction. So that means we want to get rid of that and we want to get rid of that. Now, how do I find common denominators to multiply the whole thing times? All right, and that's where this section comes up. What we do to have a common denominator is we look at this and we look at this, and we just put them together. So I'm going to multiply the whole thing by the 5 and the n plus the 2. So that is what I'm multiplying this term by and this term by. So let's go ahead and do that. And we're not actually going to divide or multiply, we're just going to put it together. Okay, so I'm going to put the n plus 2 and the 5 with the n and put that over the n plus 2. I'm going to take the 5 and the n plus 2 and put it with the 3 over the 5. Alright, now I'm going to cancel that with that and that with that. So the fractions disappeared and we're left with 5n equals 3 and our n plus 2. Okay, and then so the fractions are gone. That's what we were trying to do. Now we distribute. Then we subtract 3n from both sides. And our n then equals 3. Okay, so we'll do a few of these to make sure that we know how to do these. But one thing that I failed to go over with you that I do want to go over at this point is this was my original equation, okay, in the black box there. Alright, before we even get started, we need to find out, because if 0 is ever in the denominator, that would make our answer undefined. So we need to first of all, before we solve for n, we first of all have to find out what n cannot be. So n cannot be negative 2, because if we put negative 2 in here, what happens? Negative 2 plus 2 is 0. And whenever we have a 0 in a denominator, like in that fraction right there, the answer does not exist. Okay, so what you have to do is you have to first of all tell me what numbers n or the variable cannot be, and then you go ahead and solve for x. So we'll do that from now on. Okay, so this is example 103.2. So first of all, we're going to find out what t cannot equal. Okay, t does not equal. And what we're doing is we're looking for numbers to put in here that are going to make that 0, because we can't have 0. So if t is 0, that won't work. If t is 0 there, we get 3 times 0 is 0. So if t is 0, we cannot solve this problem because it makes one of the fractions undefined. So, and that's a key thing. If we can find a number that makes one of these fractions undefined, then the whole problem would be undefined if we use that. So if we put a 0 in here, that would make 0 minus 2 over 0 if we plug 0 in for t. That would make this undefined, which means the whole thing would not be solvable. So we know that we cannot get 0 for an answer here. So anyway, let's look and see what we've got for denominators. We have a t, a 3t, and a 3. So we're looking for something to multiply this entire thing by in order to get rid of the fractions. Well, we have a t and a 3 and a 3t. So the two things that we need to multiply it by is 3t, because that takes care of this t, this 3t, and this t, or this 3. Okay, so we just put the 3t up here and we multiply the whole thing by it. Now if this were added 3 plus t, then we'd have a 3, a t, and a 3 plus t. But since they're multiplied, we just look and say, oh, my common denominator is 3t. Okay, so then we multiply that 3t through, and we get 3t times t minus 2. Again, when any variable is added or subtracted, you put it in parentheses. Now see, this one is, there's just a 14 there, so we can just put that there, minus, and then a 3t, and we're just distributing. Now we can cancel that with that, that with that, and that with that. So I've got 3 times t minus 2 equals 14 minus t. Alright, let's go ahead and distribute. Okay, I'm going to add t to both sides, and that gives me 4t minus 6 equals 14. Alright, let's move this up. I'm going to add 6 to both sides, and I get 4t equals 20. T then equals 5. And I'm done, and I'm happy. Alright, let's go and look at 103.2. Alright, get rid of this. Alright, let's do 103.3. We have an n over an n plus 2. We have a minus 3/5, and we have equal to 0. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to multiply the entire thing by what we have in our denominator. You just put them together like that. Alright, so let's go ahead and distribute that. We're not going to actually do the math, we're just going to stick them together. And when you multiply this times 0, obviously you get 0. Alright, now let's cancel that with that, that with that. Just switch those around. Go ahead and distribute that 3. Don't forget to do negative 3 times 2. And then that gives us 2n minus 6 equals 0. Add 6 to both sides. And we get 2n equals 6. Divide by 2, and your n equals 3. Same process every time. Okay, so back, I always forget to do this. Let's go back to the original one again and tell me what number can n not be. N cannot be negative 2, because if it was negative 2 plus 2 is 0. So just make sure you've got that on there. I mean, it's not going to ask you in the problems to tell me which numbers it cannot be, but it's always good to do that whenever you have a variable in the denominator, to tell the person what n cannot be. Alright, so 103.4. 2 over 3n minus 2 over n plus 4 equals 0. Alright, so again, we look and see what is in the denominator and put it out here. Okay, so the next step again is just rewrite all of it distributed by first term, 2 over 3n, and the second term, 2 over n plus 4 equals 0. Then cancel that with that, and that with that, and we're left with 2 times n plus 4 there, minus 2 times 3n there. I just switched the numbers around. I have a tendency to do that. Distribute, distribute. 2n minus 6n is negative 4n. Subtract 8, subtract 8. Negative 4n equals negative 8. And divide by negative 4, divide by negative 4. Those cancel, and we're left with n is negative 8 over negative 4. 2 negatives is a positive. So we get 2 for that answer. Now again, let's go back and look and see what n cannot be. N cannot be, what's going to make that 0? A 0. 0 times 3 is 0. What's going to make that 0? A negative 4. So n cannot be 0 or negative 4, and it's obviously not when we solved it. We found out n is 2. But if you did get, when you solved it, n is equal to negative 4, you'd say there's no solution because negative 4 makes this whole thing undefined. Alright, let's keep going. And we will continue with a new video for the next 2 examples. So be ready for 103B as in boy.